Spoiled kids, what was your reality checks? When I mistreated someone I cared about and they actually followed through with cutting me out of their life. Father died and gave his inheritance to his 25-year-old GF. Joining the workforce. Very first day of my first job I was like, oh shit, this is what everyone was complaining about. My mom got seriously ill in cancer and ended up in the ICU for 5 months. I had to get my shit together real quick now that she couldn't fix my messes anymore. When I discovered things like electricity and water come with monthly bills. When my father died, I suddenly went into protective mode for my mother and younger siblings. My mom had always been a stay-at-home mother, and although we had an amazing support system from her family, emotionally I was not equipped for such a loss. My younger brother also switched majors, quit partying, and cutting class and started a very successful business. The sense of responsibility was overwhelming. My dad's diagnosed with debilitating disease and can no longer work. My father died. All I could think was no amount of crying will make him come back. Like when you hide from a kid and they can't find you and they start crying and you come out and tell them it's okay. That wasn't going to happen. Then I lost my dog about 2 months later. I had never experienced real loss. Sometime when I was a teenager, I realized my experiences growing up was not like other kids. Some of my friends said I was rich and I honestly didn't see it at the time. I thought my parents' house was average, but it wasn't. Living in my own in one of the most expensive cities in the planet was a baptism by fire. You learn very quick where your dollar should go and where it shouldn't. My family was middle class but treated me like they always had plenty of funds. When I heard that they took out of their retirement savings so I could go to private university, I turned in my transfer notice and came back to an in-state college and picked up a job as well. Having a disabled child. I was an only child with a supportive dad and stay-at-home mom, and I had a great childhood with very few responsibilities. When my first child was diagnosed with multiple lifelong disabilities, I knew I had to grow up and put her first and be her advocate. It has made me a better person for sure. Went to boarding school at 10, shared a room, 1 bathroom with 20 other girls, realized no one was going to conform to my morning bedtime routines. Also, I was unpopular because I really was an odd little bird. Really was a smack in the mouth, both literally figuratively. To this day I love my own space, but I get on really well with people, even when I have to fake it. My boyfriend died. No matter what I did, I couldn't manipulate or beg for him back. No amount of my parents' money could bring him back. He was gone, and it was the first time in life I couldn't get what I really wanted. Made me value relationships way more than material items. When I was complaining to a college classmate about how my laptop battery wouldn't last for a whole class and I was really hoping for a new one from my parents for Christmas. I then learned her parents were homeless and she was just hoping by Christmas they'd have a roof over their heads. Big wake-up call. We remain friends to this day. There were a few small things that helped me realize I had it pretty good. Learning that people waited until the last possible moment to turn the heating on, and not just having it come on automatically when it was cold. Realizing there were people who had to share rooms with their siblings. My friend being shocked that my fridge had an ice dispenser and 2 doors. I have a now retired hard-working dad, and had a lovely stay-at-home mom. She passed away from cancer when I was 14, that was 12 years ago. It was right when I was starting high school, put a lot of things in perspective. I don't know if spoiled is the right word, but I grew up in a wealthy, albeit very abusive family. Becoming a homeless teen included a bit of a culture shock. I always thought that if people actually tried to live frugally they wouldn't complain. Now I realize that even if you're single, have a tiny apartment with roommates, an old clunker, eat rice and beans, etc., you can barely make enough to live, much less set aside money to hopefully own a home one day without mom and dad's help. Actually crazy how much life costs and how little we make. I wasn't spoiled, my parents provided a very average middle-class upbringing, but being from the SF Bay Area, the value of the house my parents had bought in the 1970s had skyrocketed over time. After watching Fresh Prince of Bel-Air one day, I ran downstairs to my dad who was sitting on the ground, sweating from hours of pulling weeds from his garden and said, "Dad, you should become a millionaire so we can have a butler," and he just looked at me and said, "Goose frabber, I am a millionaire," and just went back to weeding. That one will always stick with me. My dad read the book Tough Love and took it very seriously after I had 2 unsuccessful attempts at different colleges. Had to move out at 19 and it was challenging to say the least. Honestly, I look back and think, I wasn't a bad kid, just didn't know what I wanted to do. I would never do the same to my kids, even though looking back I'm able to appreciate it as it made me stronger. My brother and sister both stayed pretty sheltered and it still drives me nuts sometimes, and we are in our 50s now. Moving away from Seattle for the first time. I grew up feeling embarrassed because we lived in a modest house 2M, compared to the 10M mansions my friends lived in. At one point after a date I had them drop me off down the street and I walked home because I didn't want them to see my house. A literal 2M house. Moving out of that bubble, buying a house of my own really smacked me in the face with reality of how most people live, and now looking back I can't help but laugh a little at the ridiculousness of it all. My boss in corporate America got his daughter an entry-level BS job at our company after she graduated with an art degree. She didn't sign up for healthcare. When he found out, he threw such a fit and demanded HR bend the rules. They didn't, and then she had to reap the consequences of her carelessness, or more likely Daddy just bought her a private policy at 4x the cost of a corporate one. Parents have always made good money, but I had no comprehension of what that meant growing up. Basically whatever I wanted I got within reason, of course. I wasn't obnoxious or rotten about it. But once I got my own apartment in college and had to pay my own rent and such, it was very eye-opening just how expensive I was used to living. Like, my parents don't look at prices when they grocery shop, and my mom will just decide to redecorate a room every couple of years, and that sounds crazy to me. As my daughter got older, I realized my financial illiteracy was a real hindrance in life, coupled with the fact my parents never instilled any sort of work ethic in me as a teenager. My daughter will be getting a part-time summer job when she turns 14 and will need to contribute a portion to her savings account. When she starts driving, she'll need to contribute to her insurance, gas costs. I was spoiled in the sense that I was infantilized. I didn't move out until I was 23. Having to keep up with all my own stuff, including life skills I was never taught, was a smack in the face. Can we please get some context as to why everyone thinks they were spoiled? Some of these comments sound like they got an apartment and realized bills are a thing. That's normal coming-of-age stuff, IMO. I failed out of an rich kid private college, and the only place that admitted me was night school at a large public university. For the first time I was surrounded by working-class people who were busting their ass to improve their lives, working 1 or 2 jobs while going to school. Changed my perspective. That and a couple girlfriends, one now my wife, who were the first in their family to go to college, who kicked the rich kid arrogance out of my sorry ass. Anyone else realize as an adult that your parents weren't always right when they called you spoilt growing up? Although mine definitely treated me better than their parents treated them, but their parents were horrible. Parents divorced when I was halfway through 9th grade. They pretty much check out of parenting for the remaining years of high school because of their own mental struggles with our family falling apart. I moved out at 18, was going to community college full-time while working 2 jobs. Life's been tough and has definitely humbled me, but I like who I am so much more because of it. Only spoiled in the financial way. Lots of other categories came with abuse and neglect. But my first reality check was when I got an apartment with SSI. Horrible neighborhood. Trash everywhere. Psychotic neighbors. Then there was the whole will I be able to eat this week thing. Edit God, I didn't realize how my definition of spoiled is so different from most people. I thought I was privileged, but you'll sound wealthy. I just thought wealthy meant not worrying about going without. When my sister died, we were teenagers. We were the rich family in a small town. I went from being envied to pitied. Having an eating disorder earlier in life made me realize that no one but me would take me out of the black void. Additionally, depression kind of helped me to be aware of my feelings and others, after therapy. Becoming a mom. It was hard but probably the best thing that ever happened to me. I was called spoiled my whole life by friends and family. Meanwhile, when I went home from school every night, my mom would beat me on and off for hours and would starve me on purpose to keep me slim and trim. I was in elementary school. Kidnapped grandpa. Shit was tough. Just that week I had a sport tryout where I ain't have no hunger or bite, got thrashed by 20 players clearly better than me despite being a lower status. I was destroyed. I was prepared for the mocking, but no. They just offered to hang out and were pretty chill about it. Way more than any high class I ever met. Realized most of us are assholes. Interesting how it takes a rich person's relative to fall ill for them to wake up to reality is that because their source of wealth is threatened when their parents fall ill. And they get their oh shit moment when they realize they can no longer depend solely on their parents for everything. Becoming an adult and realizing I can't just drop 20k on shopping to make me feel better. That you had to pay your debts back and debt was a real, countable thing. I always chalked it up to this imaginary thing that wasn't a big deal. Oh boy. Doing Habitat for Humanity-like trips to West Virginia and Nicaragua. Seeing other people's homes in disrepair and then building a personal relationship with the homeowners hits differently. These people were just born into their situation just like I was born into mine. It made me appreciate the stuff I have more. The moment I realized my friends in college who had to take loans weren't doing it that way because their parents were jerks or because they were obstinately paying my own way. Until that realization, my understanding of the world was that's just how it worked. You got to college and your parents paid for it. That's when I started looking around at the world around me. Living alone LOL. I didn't realize when people used to say you're so spoiled that they were really saying you have your basic needs met with a reasonable consistency and are unlikely to starve or freeze to death this year and not your parents buy you all kinds of cool toys. I lived a cushy life in a high-income area raised by a single mother. We weren't always well off, but I was too young to remember and was treated very well despite that. I got a girlfriend who was mixed and from the low-income area around me. My mother hated her and constantly made comments about her. I then realized, oh, she's racist and classist, WTF. Eventually, my mother hated her so much, I was kicked out of the house and was forced to move in with them. Now I live in a household with some financial issues and pay rent support them. Wouldn't trade any of it for the world. I had an entitled phase in my mid-20s where I didn't realize all that my parents were doing for me. I was being a little asshole because I was mad that my mom had me paying $400 a month in rent to live in my childhood home with no privacy, by the way, but that's another ordeal. So one day, I decide to argue about how this is too much money and how it's bullshit, etc., etc. My mom was not playing that day. In a single swoop she told me that from that day on I needed to pay for my own gas and car insurance. I was mad AF, but I learned my lesson. Moving out and being poor. Being kicked out at 18 for not living up to my father's expectations. Went from silver spoon to dirt floor real quick. Both parents died and I had to look after my 13-year-old sister. Moved to a different country to study and started living outside of my bubble of privilege. Honestly, best thing I could have ever done for myself. Moving out and having to pay rent. Rent day came and I'm like, but that's all my money. Learned real quick how to be a little better